So on that note, I'm now going to hand over to our first presenter, who is coming from the American Astronomical Society, Yaswant, who's going to tell us a little bit about the work of the IAUS. So over to you, Yaswant. So you can just...
Okay, thank you for coming. So I'm coming from the American Astronomical Society. I am the Public Policy Fellow. The American Astronomical Society, the IAUS, represents the roughly 8,000 students, scientists, researchers, and engineers involved in the astronomical sciences in the US. In 2021, we updated our strategic plan, making the protection of the dark and quiet skies one of our top priorities. And so this is something that we've been working very hard on for the past couple of years. And I've been involved in this pretty much the entire time that I've been at the IAUS. One of the first questions we have when looking at the US regulatory landscape is who's in charge? US is a massive bureaucracy with dozens of agencies with all sorts of weird acronyms, so it can be a little confusing at times as to what exactly is going on. I'm going to focus on three right now. So there is the Federal Aviation Administration, which is located in the Department of Transportation. We've got the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, and then the newest office, the Office of Space Commerce, located in the Department of Commerce, which was created just a few years ago. So let's start with the FAA. So by law, the FAA is authorized to regulate the launch and reentry of space objects. Right now, this is just rockets because nobody has made a space elevator yet. So what they do is they examine rockets. Their priority is to make sure that there is no potential harm to public life and property. They don't so much care as if your rocket blows up the satellite that's in it. It mostly care about if the rocket blows up and falls down on a town of people. Part of what they look at is also things involved in launch, but they do not have any authority on in-space activities. So once it leaves the atmosphere and starts operating in space, they no longer have the authority to put any regulations down on it. They can, however, regulate things that are still involved in the parts of launch. So the upper stages of rockets, for instance, which are usually ejected into space, because that is part of a launch activity, they can regulate stuff related to that. So just a few weeks ago, they proposed a new set of rules on disposal of the upper stage of rockets. And so under the proposed rules, operators would have a couple of different options. They could do controlled reentry within 30 days of launch. They could leave it in low Earth orbit and then make sure it has a reentry within 25 years. This may be shortened to 5 years based on comment. This is somewhat what the FCC has done, a similar rule asking for reentry of satellites within 5 years of close of operations. They could send it to a disposal orbit or graveyard orbit, which could be in very high Earth orbit, or it could be out of Earth orbit entirely and into a heliocentric orbit. So that would be in case of missions to Mars, missions to Moon, stuff like that, that would be sent into a heliocentric orbit. Or you can contract another company to remove the debris within a certain amount of time. FCC, on the other hand, is in charge of handling the spectrum for the US operators. Which is kind of interesting that the FCC has sort of stepped in a big way in terms of satellite regulations. Technically, they're only authorized to do things related to spectrum management, so satellite-to-satellite communications, satellites-to-ground communications, but they are also allowed to make additional regulations in the interest of public good in relation to spectrum management, which they have interpreted as meaning that they can put regulations in place on things like orbital use. So operators have to put plans on where they're going to be orbiting, how long they're going to be up there, all those things. Debris mitigation, so operators have to put a debris mitigation plan. The new thing is mitigations on ground-based astronomy as well, so that's been pretty good. So recently, there's been a couple of different satellite constellations that have been authorized under the FCC, and part of their authorization includes a coordination agreement with the National Science Foundation to minimize impacts on astronomy. So this includes the Generation 2 of Starlink, Amazon's Kuiper, there's the OneWeb satellites, and 2 smaller satellite constellation operators, which is IceEye and Planet. The goal currently is to reduce the brightness to be no brighter than 7th magnitude, which is roughly the limit of human visibility. That is also sort of the technical limit required for Rubin operations. So that's sort of where that has come from. This has been recently implemented, and the companies have all agreed to it, and this has been pretty well. Companies have done a pretty good job of trying to meet this. SpaceX has been working pretty hard on their Gen 2 Starlinks to try to meet this 7th magnitude. They haven't been able to quite get to 7th magnitude yet, but it's better than what other people have done so far. Amazon is actually going to be launching 2 prototypes of their Project Kuiper satellites, one with no mitigation efforts and one with several mitigation efforts to actually do a study of how effective some of these things are. And so this has been a pretty positive step. Office of Space Commerce is one of the newer offices, again, within the Department of Commerce. The current U.S. Congress isn't really a fan of the FAA and FCC expanding their authority, and so that's causing a little bit of tension right now. And so what they've done is they've created this new office called the Office of Space Commerce, and the intent of the current U.S. Congress is to put regulatory power on space activities in this new office. Currently, what that means is they're transferring space situational awareness to the Office of Space Commerce, so tracking of satellites, sending out conjunction alerts, things like that. It is unclear what other specific regulatory powers the Office of Space Commerce will have. U.S. Congress is still debating that along with many, many other things at the moment. But that's sort of where things seem to be shifting at the moment. A lot of this, of course, is questions over jurisdiction. Does FAA and FC actually have jurisdiction over designs of satellites on orbital debris and things like that? So that's a big legal question that remains open. Right now in Congress, they have a couple of different things that they're working on. There's this thing called the SAT Streamlining Act that came out of the U.S. House. This would have made the FCC the main regulatory power of space activities. This would have enshrined into law a lot of the things the FCC is already doing and expanded those powers as well. This failed to pass the U.S. House of Representatives on jurisdictional issues, basically. So this came out of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, which made the members of the House Committee on the Science, Space Technology not happy at all. And so they basically protested the bill and shot it down. And so that's sort of been caught up in that sort of battle. On the Senate side, the only thing that they have concrete so far is what's called the Orbits Act. So this is focused on debris removal, active debris removal techniques and things like that. This was introduced in the Senate and is currently waiting to be scheduled for debate. There is also recently introduced the Space SSA Transition Act. So this was introduced in the House Committee on Science, Basic Technology. The main purpose of this would be to provide funding towards NASA and the Office of Space Commerce to form a committee to develop guidelines for civilian space situational awareness. So basically, how should we handle space situational awareness? What are some voluntary best practice guidelines we can give to industry operators and things like that? So let's form a working group to figure that out. That's all that says. There is 2 versions of a commercial space act that is currently being floated around, one in the House, one in the Senate. Neither version is public yet, but I have seen both of them. The House version's philosophy is mostly that there should be no regulations beyond obligations to the Outer Space Treaty, by which I mean the only obligation they seem to believe is that we shouldn't send any nukes into space, and beyond that, we have no other obligation to the Outer Space Treaty. The Senate version is a little more in-depth. They have a larger list of priorities. However, the Senate version is also currently just a bullet point list, so that I received last night. So if you have any input that you want to hear, I have until Monday to respond to the Senate. So I'd love to hear your comments. But that is currently the state of the U.S. regulatory environment. It's just a bunch of people arguing over who has authority and who doesn't have authority. So until that gets sorted out, the best thing we can do as astronomers is to continue to engage with the NASA and the NSF. These are science agencies and not regulatory agencies, but they are the ones who commission the studies on what's going on with orbital debris. They can do studies on mitigating effects on astronomy, things like that. They are the ones who are going to be advising all these other bodies on what the best practices guidelines are going to be. Each of the regulatory agencies have their own advisory boards made up of members from NASA, NSF, civilians, from commercial sector, from science and all that stuff. And they're the ones who will help create the regulations for these various agencies. And then, of course, at the end of the day, Congress is the one who writes the laws, who decides what's going to happen. So we need to continue to engage with Congress in a meaningful way and make sure our needs are met by them. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
can take questions at the end.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, Yaswant. And just to mention, we're going to try and have 10 minutes at the end where we can take questions on these initial policy approaches.